I'm not finding Pranjal. Pranjal. It's not Pranjal. Okay, Pranjal is also here. We have all our guests. And we are live on YouTube. Hi, everybody. This is Ramanuj from LawSikho. I am I'm one of the co-founders, and we are a legal education company. So, a quick brief about LawSikho. We offer some of the most advanced legal courses anywhere in the world. We give practical training to lawyers who want to uh, deal with advanced legal matters, and we've been doing this for a while. We have trained some of the top law firms. We have worked with big companies, banks, conglomerates, catering to their legal requirements. Big tech companies. Uh, so, so that's a little bit about us. We are here today to learn about how to get training contracts and what's the process like. Somebody's asking what is the name of the company. We work with ICICI Bank, ITC, Microsoft, Samsung. Like, I'm not sure. The list you can check on our website. So, so okay. So today the agenda is to learn about how to get a training contract at a big international law firm, and I have three, not one but three different guests with me who have already achieved that. There's Pranjal, there's Mridul, and there's Harry Clark, and all of them are also great lawyers, and Harry is a blogger, and they are influencers in their own right on social media. So it's a great opportunity for us to learn from them today. Uh, right now we have I see about 150 people and growing uh, on over here on Zoom, and a lot of people are on YouTube live as well. So I'd request everybody to introduce yourselves. Just tell us, in the chat. You can do it on the YouTube live chat, or you can do it. We have kept the chat open. You can just quickly share, what is your name, where are you logging in from, what you want to take away from this session, and any initial questions, so that it will keep me uh, informed about what you are looking forward to from this session, and we can accordingly steer the discussion. I would not be taking questions maybe right in the beginning, but we'll get to that soon enough. Okay, welcome Harry, welcome Mridul, welcome Pranjal. Let's get started. So why don't we start from Pranjal? Pranjal, you start by telling us about a bit about yourself and your journey and training contract experience. I believe you didn't join, but even the selection process and what made you come back, etc.
All right. I mean, I would start by saying that I'm really not an influencer in the social media. I barely have 200 followers on Instagram.
We gotta change that today.
Yeah.
Starts here.
I really hope so. At least we gotta make it to 210. That's my, I would say.
You right now you'll log into your LinkedIn before this session is done. You'll find like a few thousand.
All right. Okay. I graduated from HNLU Raipur. I was doing a BA LLB 5-year program. After that, I went to Cambridge. I was pursuing a Master of Corporate Law. So immediately after my law school, I went for my master's. Over there, I started applying for training contracts as well as vacation schemes, but my primary focus was on training contracts. Ultimately, I think I sent my application to around 10 law firms in total, and then I made it to 3 of them. I was going to join either Slaughter and May or Millbank, either of these two firms. So Slaughter and May is a Magic Circle firm, and Millbank is an international American firm. I think it's Chicago based. I was going to join either of these firms. However, something happened back home due to personal reasons. I had to fly back to India, and that's how I ended up working in India. So I was working in a corporate law firm in India called as Khaitan and Company in the Bombay office. But then I recently resigned. So back to where I started, I'm unemployed and do not have fancy designation like either Harry or Mridul for that matter. I think that's my introduction for now, I suppose.
Okay, so basically you let us know certainly that you are up for grabs, like you're back in the market. I'm sure a lot of people are listening.
I hope.
All the talent scouts, they have their ears up. Harry, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks for having me on. So I'm Harry. I'm from the UK. I'm a future trainee solicitor at Baker McKenzie, and I'll be starting there this September. I was applying for training contracts and vacation schemes and open days and all that sort of thing whilst I was at university. So I studied law at university for 3 years, and I was successful just before I started my third year. So I did 3 rounds of applications, and it was in that final round that I received my offer. And then since then, I've started the LPC, which is the practice course that you have to do prior to your training contract in the UK. And I'm sort of midway through that at the moment, and looking to start my training contract in September. Like you said, I'm a blogger. I sort of create a bunch of free resources and advice for aspiring lawyers who I'm sure are listening. I've been doing that for about 6 months. I do so on social media, and I sort of collaborate with a bunch of other companies and things to help produce those resources as well. And most recently, I started my own legal podcast back in February called More from Law, and I've been balancing that alongside my studies. Really, that's my introduction.
Great, thank you. Yes, next is Mridul. Yes, Mridul.
Hi, thank you. It's splendid to be here. I did my law from National Law University, Jodhpur in India. And in my 4th year, I applied for a vacation scheme with Linklaters, got through. And I was here in London for their 4-week vacation scheme program in November and December. At the end of it, I was interviewed for a training contract, and I started this training contract in March this year, last month. I am currently in the general corporate team at Linklaters. And like I said, it's very nice to be here. Hello to all.
Thank you. So let's get started. So an opening question to all of you. Today we have an international audience. There are a lot of people who have logged in from different countries. What is very attractive about getting a training contract? What is it that attract top talent to go and work in top law firms and in international law firms and want a training contract there, and what is it in fact? So who's going to start? Maybe you can start. Mridul, you're already on the screen. Go ahead.
Okay. I think what's most attractive for a lot of people, including me, is the opportunity of working in a global law firm where your colleagues are from all over the world. Your transactions, your clients, and the kind of advisory you do is cross-border, which means you're not focusing on one particular municipal law. Rather, as a lawyer, you're reading through laws of different countries to give the best advice to your client. It is also, and the most important point for people of our age, is training and career development. And one of the biggest advantages of working in a global law firm is the kind of training that they give. They really emphasize on investing in your career to ensure that you rise as quickly as possible through the ladders of being a corporate lawyer. So these two are the most important points for me.
So what is a training contract, and why is it not just a job in the law firm? Why call it training contract?
A training contract is basically a concept among the UK law firms. It is a 2-year contract where you are not an associate at the firm, rather you are a trainee solicitor, and you are being trained in different seats or different departments to work as a lawyer. So for these 2 years, I will be transferring to 4 different departments, 6 months each. And these departments are given as per my preference and choice. So for example, for the first 6 months, I'm in the corporate law department. My next potential choice is dispute resolution, and so on and so forth. And for these 6 months in this department, I will be trained as a corporate department lawyer. And at the end of these 2 years, I will be able to choose a department out of these 4 where I want to qualify as an associate and then permanently work as a lawyer there. So it's a great thing to be trained in different departments before you decide where you want to specialize.
Got it. Thanks, Mridul. Harry, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, of course. So for me, when it came to choosing the type of firm that I wanted to apply to, I'd always kind of really enjoyed the idea of working from people with, all over the world, all kinds of different backgrounds. And as was kind of hinted at in the previous answer, I think the kind of clients and the kind of level of training that you get are really fantastic. And there's a lot of opportunities that only international law firms can offer. So for example, one of the things that I really want to do when I start my training contract is to do a secondment, which is essentially where, rather than working at the department in that law firm in that country in one of those 6-month periods, instead you can either go to one of the clients and work in-house or work for the client directly in their offices for a 6-month period. Or one of the things I'd like to do is an international secondment. So you can actually go to one of the offices of the law firm all around the world, and you could get to work with one of their offices again for either a 3 or 6 month period to really kind of get some of that international experience. Not a lot of law firms can offer that, and it's the ones which are quite international in scope and kind of have the ability to do that and all of kind of connections and the budget and everything else that offers a really, really great training opportunity. So I think for me, it was really the secondment angle that was really interesting. And of course, international law firms tend to have a great variety of practice areas as well. So when it comes to choosing which of those departments you'd like to do for your 6-month periods, you've got a really big selection of things that you get to try. And it's all sorts of different diverse areas of law and all different types of clients in different industries. So in short, I think it's just the sheer number of opportunities that a sort of international law firm provides versus others where you might not have that chance.
Got it. Pranjal, any comments?
To be honest, I think back then when I was actually applying for training contracts, I was sitting on a huge pile of student debt. So my primary motivation was to pay it off. And I'm not going to lie, Milbank is one of the highest paying law firms across the country, especially with have London office. So that was my primary motivation over there. However, when I was actually determining as to which all firms I need to apply to, I've always, even during my internships, I've always interned with smaller firms, smaller in terms of quantum. And Milbank had barely like 20 or 30 associates back then. So I think the feeling of belongingness is really important for me. And I've realized that the UK-based firms put a lot of investment. I mean, they put a lot of efforts and a lot of money in this whole training contract. So I think the whole competition is so cutthroat, and they are actually trying to attract the brightest minds. So, and like he said that after 2 years, he will actually have that opportunity to choose which seat he wants to do. The reason why it's not a job is because your seat is not really confirmed, which essentially means that if you don't do very well in your training contract, your chances of converting that training contract into a full-time position of an associate probably gets reduced. So it's not, that is how they differentiate. That's the distinction between an associate of an Indian firm and a trainee of a UK firm or a firm that's based in London.
Understood. So, I understand like how competitive is this is getting a training contract. Like I understand it's competitive, but how competitive? Obviously, the level of competition will differ from a lawyer in the UK and of course somebody who, let's say in India or in another country, in Malaysia or any other country. Of course, there will be a different level of competition. So, if you can throw some light on this, all three of you starting.
Yeah, so I think I will have to address the elephant in the room. To be honest, the competition in India, even though it's intense, but it mostly arises from the population aspect of India. But when you talk about the UK, the competition, I mean, we as law students are not only competing against other law students, but we are also competing against people who come from non-legal background, which means that unlike in India, anybody who is studying any college degree, who's in college, is essentially eligible on papers to apply for a training contract. So to simply put, and all these law firms, especially all these Magic Circle and London-based law firms are very proud of very proud of portraying the fact that they actually care about diversity in the legal field. So to put it simply, right, 50% of the total seats in a particular law firm could roughly be reserved for for students who come from non-legal background. So the challenge is not just to compete against lawyers, but also to compete against people who come from variety of backgrounds. That's the kind of competition we are facing.
Got it. And so if you are like, still, if you could throw some light on, like, if there's a different kind of competition, so how like very few Indian people get through, I mean, from India, for example, get through to a training contract, right? In a year, maybe about 10 or 20, or a handful of people. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and these are usually from top national universities, from what we experience. So is there something like that, like that you have to be from a top university to get through to a training contract?
Just to throw some light on the Indian perspective, the reason why it's a little more competitive in India as compared to other countries, not the UK. I think Pranjal has thrown some good light on what happens in the UK. There, the problem is that law as well as non-legal backgrounds both can apply. In India, the issue is that not all law firms from the UK have a training program with India or have a vacation scheme for Indian law students. And I know of only 3 law firms which accept applications from all Indian law students. It's Linklaters, Allen and Overy, and Herbert Smith Freehills, which we usually know as HSF. These 3 firms have a specific India internship program, which can translate into a training contract, which can translate into a job as an associate. And Linklaters hires about 5 people every year. Allen and Overy hires about 3 people, I think, every year. And HSF hires about 6 people every year. So that's a very, very thin margin. That's a very, very small amount of people and small number of seats who get selected. As far as national law universities are concerned, yes, there has been till now a pattern of selecting people from a select few colleges, but that pattern is breaking away very slowly, but definitely. And those law colleges from where you do not see students getting a vacation scheme, you will still find a lot of those people coming to these law firms, not through the traditional vacation scheme route, but by doing an LLM and then applying, or by getting some on-the-job experience in a good Indian law firm and then transferring laterally.
Right. So, so that's another thing I wanted to ask eventually about the LLM part. But let me just understand this now that you have mentioned vacation scheme. What is the difference between a vacation scheme and a training contract? Of course, I understand the difference. It's basically like an internship vacation scheme, but still, if you can throw some light on it.
Sure. A vacation scheme is the first step to getting a training contract. So typically around June, July, you will see that these 3 firms that I mentioned, HSF, Linklaters, and Allen Overy, they will open their applications to the Indian students, and you will be able to apply. You'll have an interview, and if you get through the interview, you go for a vacation scheme. A vacation scheme is like an internship. Linklaters has it for 4 weeks, HSF has it for 3 weeks, and Allen and Overy has it for 2 weeks. HSF and Allen and Overy do it in the summers. Linklaters for Indian students does it in the winters. When you go to the vacation scheme, you go and get some experience, and they assess you on the basis of your on-the-job abilities. They also give you some practical assignments to complete. And then at the end of the vacation scheme, you have an interview for a training contract. And once you get through that interview, you get the 2-year training contract. So that's
Is it possible to get a training contract if you did not do a vacation scheme? Because I think you can apply directly also.
That's what happened to me. Yeah, so obviously I can't speak from the India perspective, but I didn't do a vacation scheme before starting my training contract. There's certainly one of the ways that you can get a training contract, but by no means the only way. And you don't need to have one of those in place beforehand before you do your training contract. Like what sort of Mridul said, a vacation scheme is a bit like a kind of 2-week internship or like a 2-week interview where the law firm wants to see what you're like, how you approach your work. If you're someone who is going out there and curious and always trying to push yourself and trying to kind of show enthusiasm. And it's one of the ways that you can get recruited for a training contract. However, you can do what I did, which is simply apply directly. If you're a student in India, for example, a lot of international firms consider graduates from all over the world. And if anything, they look for international candidates because they want to kind of balance their cohort so that they've got a good background so that they can help with clients from all over the world. So you can either apply directly or you can apply for a vacation scheme. Vacation schemes tend to be slightly more competitive than a direct training contract application, just because I think, like we said, you get the element of having some practical work experience regardless of whether or not you get the training contract at the end of it. And it's also a kind of really good opportunity, if you get one, to make a really good impression on the firm and hopefully kind of cement yourself in the training contract process. Some firms will also recruit from the vacation scheme before they start looking at training contract applicants. So for example, if you have a summer vacation scheme, at the end of that summer vacation scheme, say it was 20 people who did it, they might say, okay, we want to take 10 of these people out of our potential 15 training contract places that we have available and give it to those people, which then means that when it comes to the training contract, we've got this many places left over. Generally, they try to balance it, but I think the argument is that with a vacation scheme, you kind of get your foot in the door first to be considered first before they potentially start giving training contracts away before they take the direct applications into consideration.
Understood. Here I have another question: is that how does doing a training contract compare with joining a chamber and like going for? I think you have to study to become a barrister, right? Mm-hmm. In UK. So how is that process and how does it compare?
Sure. So there's a lot of differences between the barrister and solicitor route. I think one of the biggest ones is that if you're someone who wants to be in court, someone who wants to be giving lots of presentations, someone who does things like advocacy and mooting, which is essentially just standing in front of a judge and making arguments, that's more akin to the barrister route. Solicitors tend to work in groups, they tend to work in firms, they tend to deal with a lot more things like, preparing documentation, they might do negotiations on behalf of parties, rather than kind of what you see on TV, which is standing in court and talking to a judge. So if you're kind of unsure as to which way you'd want to go, I'd ask yourself a few questions. Do you prefer working on your own, or do you prefer working in groups? Do you like public speaking and being confident and standing in front of judges, or do you prefer things like writing exercises and kind of drafting and negotiations in a group environment? So they're slightly different, but the kind of that's the sort of main differences between the two, I think.
Yeah, but if you can also explain the difference in, if you want to become a barrister, of course you'll have to follow a different path. So what's the path and how does it differ from becoming a solicitor?
So it's generally through something called pupillage. Essentially, I don't know too much about the barrister process, but I've interviewed and talked to a lot of barristers and QCs. And with the training contract application process, you'll generally do some kind of written application form. You'll generally then do some kind of test, a written kind of test, verbal reasoning test, a video interview, and then you'd get invited to something called an assessment center, where you'll have a couple of in-person interviews and in-person exercises. They generally last about 4 to 5 hours. Whereas for pupillage, you'll probably still do some kind of written application, and then you'll have multiple rounds of interviews with the chambers themselves, and then be considered for that pupillage round. As a general rule of thumb, there are generally a lot less pupillage places on offer compared to solicitors, simply because barristers' chambers are a lot smaller than especially big international firms, and as a result, their budgets are different, the number of clients they have are different, and the amount of people they can take on each year are different as well. So generally, there might be, say, 2 to 5 pupillage places up for grabs each year from chambers, versus there are firms which recruit hundreds of training contract candidates each year. So it can really vary depending on their size. Okay.
My next question would be would go to either Pranjal or Mridul. So we have noticed that over the years, like there was a time when I graduated back in 2011 from law school. From my batch, at least 7-8 people joined international law firms and training contracts, and similar numbers from other non-national universities, at least top 3, 4, 5 universities. Compared to that, we see much fewer people being picked up by international law firms from India. So do you think this has something to do with the business with India, or how well the international investments and international trade with India grows? That has an impact on the number of training contracts received by Indian lawyers?
Should I address this question?
Sure, go ahead.
To be honest, the way I see it is the reason why a lot of Indian students do not make into either training contracts or do not get vacation schemes is because the lack of knowledge, the lack of awareness. Because to be honest, when I was in law school till final year, none of my seniors, nobody from my first year till my final year had actually gotten any vacation scheme or a training contract in any of the firms. And I was absolutely alien to the concept of training contract, to be very honest. And then adding to that, the way we write cover letters, the way we draft cover letters to Indian law firms is significantly different as to what we are expected to actually write to put in when we are applying for either training contracts or vacation schemes. So for example, the standard process of applying to any Indian tier law firm is we tell them that this is what we have done and this is what our area of interest is, and you are like probably pretty good at it, and that's why you should probably take us. But I mean, if I probably think from my slaughter and make cover letter, it had 4 paragraphs, and back then my area of interest was M&A and competition law. So in 2 paragraphs, rather than 1 paragraph, I spoke about M&A and I spoke about antitrust. In M&A, I actually discussed the deal, rather the Slaughter and May's role in defending the target who was a client. So in probably protecting their client from being taken over by a hostile company. So I spoke about how they actually employed a white knight defense, and it was like legendary. So this is the kind of things I think these people expect from us. They really want us to dig deeper. They really want us to tell them as to why we really deserve a spot in such places. And I think this is where we all sort of lose in terms of lack of substandard quality applications. And that's what I learned when I actually went to the UK, and then I spoke to people. I researched about how to go about it. So this is the skill which all of us kind of need to master. And I mean, I think Mridul will be able to substantiate my answer now.
Mridul, you want to add something?
I'm not sure, Ramanuj, about the number of applications in 2011 and now. And I think from my general understanding, I think you're right. The number of firms which used to take Indian students is much lesser now as compared to those golden years of 2010, 11, 12, when people started getting vacation schemes and training contracts from Indian law schools. I'm not quite sure about the reason. One thing I know is that it is extremely expensive for these firms to get anybody from abroad for a vacation scheme and then for a training contract, because they have to pay for our visas. They have to pay entirely for our qualifications. For example, my firm is paying for my qualification as a solicitor in London. And I mean, generally, it's a lot more expensive. They have to pay for our houses when we are staying here during vacation schemes, etc. But as you would appreciate, the market has also not been great in that sense. And after COVID-19, of course, a lot of things are going to change. So I think that is probably the reason. What I most agree with from what Pranjal said is about awareness. And I think one thing that all Indian law students can do is research a lot more about these training contracts and vacation schemes. There is a lot of information on the internet and a lot of people who are willing to help, only waiting for a question to be asked. And I think once you get to know these things, you will have a better chance at the application than previously.
Great. Probably we are going to tap into your expertise and see if we can get more to help more people to create some awareness. But a question, this brings to my next question, is that I remember the people who got through the training contracts were people who have been preparing for a while. Like, they have been preparing for like a couple of years. I remember I had juniors who have been studying Russian and Japanese at the same time, because she believed doing those languages would actually help her to get a training contract, and she got it. Like, by the way, she got it and I have seen people doing a lot of things that other law students didn't do, because it would prepare them to get training contract. And the biggest mistake I would say many other people who were toppers in the batch, who tried to apply and didn't get through, or got rejected in some level of interviews. That's the other thing I want to ask you, the entire process, how it is right now, like from application, what is the application like and all that. But can you talk about preparation a bit? Like, how long does it take to prepare, or how long did you guys prepare? Or even if you did not prepare, even if you are like super smart, and normally people have to prepare for longer, do share that. So what is the way, like, if somebody in their second year or third year says, what, I want to spend a couple of hours a day preparing myself to get a training contract. Given that it's so competitive, then how can they start? I mean, you know, Indians are known for preparation. I'm sure even other people do it. So some words. Starting with Harry, maybe. Harry, why don't you start? Like, how did you prepare? How was it like for you?
Yeah, sure. No, you absolutely do need to prepare. You know, there might be those rare stories where people apply once and get lucky, but I don't personally know anyone who did that. So preparation is really key. And I think one of the best things you can do when you're starting out is the research stage. So before you even begin trying to write an application, before you begin trying to you know, put anything down on paper, I think one of the best things you can do is to research a firm to a high level of detail that was kind of hinted at earlier. So essentially what that involves is going online, you know, reading about the firm's recent deals, going on their website, learning about their competitors as well, so that you understand how that law firm fits in the legal market and kind of how what the small differences are between two firms which say are both international, both based in London, but have slightly different focuses and different practice areas. If you get the opportunity as well, I think speaking to people who are either currently practicing at the firm or about to be, so a future trainee, for example, is a great way to kind of get their insight and get more of a personal connection as to what the firm does. Obviously, you can't travel at the moment, so a great way to do that is going on sites like LinkedIn or cold emailing people and trying to find, you know, 10, 15 minutes for a phone call to ask them some questions. And the reason that research stage is so important is because when it comes to writing the application, you need to demonstrate a really good knowledge of the firm, and you need to relate, you know, what the firm's positives are and why it attracts you to your own experiences and your own kind of academics. So for example, if you've done your research and you really like the fact that a firm is really strong in M&A, for example, you want to talk about how your work experience and your studies to date have related to that desire for M&A and to practice in an M&A firm. And then you can kind of go into more detail as to what the firm really does. So research stage is absolutely key, and going online, speaking to firms and reading as much as you can is probably the best first step.
All right, and did you have to prepare and learn some law maybe
So
and there are some different exercises, I believe, analytical exercises, etc. So how do you prepare for this?
Yes, so most law firms tend to accommodate for the fact that you know, a vast majority of their candidates, as we kind of said at the beginning of this webinar, are coming from a non-law background anyway. So the purposes of interviews and the purposes of tests are not so much to test your legal knowledge. So they won't say, for example, you know, what is section this of this act? Instead, it's much more likely to want to test your kind of interpersonal skills, the ability to communicate well and talk to other people, the ability to demonstrate business-related skills like commercial awareness is a really big buzz phrase, which is kind of understanding the business world, understanding how you break down problems, how you analyze them. Those are the kind of the key things that a test or an interview is aiming to get out of you. So for example, when you do something like a case study and the interviewer gives you some information about a company and asks you to comment on it, they're not expecting you to be an instant expert on the law surrounding the company and to comment on what section of what act might apply. Instead, they'll say, you know, given this information, what do you think the firm or the company needs to be aware of? What do you think their legal needs might be in future? And kind of asking you to argue your side and to kind of provide some rationale for it. So yeah, it's less about your kind of legal knowledge per se, but kind of how you think and how you break down problems and demonstrate that to the recruiter.
Understood. Okay. Mridul?
To address that part of your question where you asked what a second or a third year law student can do or to prepare for one of these vacation schemes, I would say that look at the application process. During the application stage, they are looking at two things. One is your CV and the other is your answers to the practical questions that they ask. The answers to the practical questions can be answered well by looking at what Pranjal and Harry said. Research well into the firm, research well into what they do, have a general commercial awareness and answer that question accordingly. But when it comes to the CV, your resume can be solidified by having substantial international experience. A lot of law students, I know for sure in India, but also in other jurisdictions, participate and work quite hard towards moot court competitions. And this is where they come in. In your interview, you can talk about how you know how it is to be part of an international culture from your experience of participating in international moot court competition. Some other things, a demonstrated academic ability always helps. If you have constantly good grades, you're definitely going to have +1 over others. One more thing is a general sense of commercial awareness, which you can get through practical experience. Lots of commercial internships will help you get that. And it is not necessarily tier 1 law firms where you have to intern. You have to just demonstrate that you understand how it is to work in a commercial law firm, what transactions are, what deals are. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Anything from Pranjal?
Well, I mean, I think not so much when you talk about what a second year or a third year law student can do, because I think that has been adequately addressed by both these experts. However, I think I would still like to talk about the importance of research. So I remember during my Milbank interview, when they asked me as to why do I want to work at Milbank, I would ideally never talk about the fact that they're like amazing at leverage finance or the capital markets practice is brilliant, because I mean, they all know about it. What I do want to talk about is, and this is what I told them, that I looked into the organizational structure of 50 international law firms, and Milbank is one of the very few law firms that is actually co-headed by somebody who's not white, who's rather an Indian. Now, this particularly manifests the fact that Milbank actually cares about diversity and cultural inclusiveness. Then I used this argument and I told them that I would rather want to work in a place where my career ladder is not hampered by owing to my cultural ethnicity or my color. So the point that I'm trying to make here is, please find your reasons. Please, if you cannot find a reason to applying to a particular firm, make sure that you have a personal reason for that, because that will always help.
Great.
Yeah.
I think that's great advice. Also, one more thing I want to ask you now that I think we have reached that point. What about LLM? And there are a lot of questions that has come about which LLM to do if you want to work in an international law firm. So, if you can throw some light on that.
All right. So there is no straitjacket formula to answer this question. Firstly, I would address that LLM is not a prerequisite. LLM is not a requirement for anybody to actually secure a vacation scheme or a training contract. So that's first limb of the question, which is being constantly asked in the chat group. For which LLM, I think the way to go about is do an LLM in things that you really like and you really enjoy. Kindly do not cater to what the firm expects from you, because the firm A does not really care as to what you have studied, considering the fact that all the people who are there, everybody and anybody under the sun can apply. So your qualification, rather your specialization, would not really matter as such. That is B. However, I mean, for example, and having said that, I have known a lot of people who actually did their masters in human rights law or who studied environments law during their master's degree, but then they ended up getting job offers from Linklaters or HSF or any of this Magic Circle or Silver Circle firm. So I think the way to go about is you have to tell them that why you are the ideal candidate for them to consider, despite not studying what the firm actually does. So that's the key that you have to look into, and that's the burden that you have to establish. So if the firm asks you, why didn't you study corporate law? Why didn't you study commercial law? Then you have to justify that, and you have to figure out how you're going to do that. So there is no such degree that is actually ideal, but I mean, anything pertaining to commercial law would help, because that's what most of these firms do. It's a commercial law firm. They do transactional work. So any experience in commercial law would help. Having said that, it's not a prerequisite. It's not a necessity.
Understood. If you can just tell us, like say somebody is not. I think people have to apply while they're students to get the training contract, right? So if somebody has already had a few years of experience, and now there are quite a few such people here. So if they go for an LLM, that would be a year when they can apply for training contract, right?
Sorry, I couldn't understand your question.
Let's say somebody who's working cannot apply for a training contract, right? You have to be a student to apply for it.
Not necessarily. I mean, especially the average age, and I think Mridul will be able to talk more about it. But then the way I see it is the average age of training contract across London law firms is around 26 or 27. So even though the LLB course in the UK is of 3 years, people kind of take a break, people figure it out. There are people who have not studied law, people have probably worked in a different segment, and then they apply for a traineeship. So there is no such thing as you have to apply when you are actually studying, or you have to apply immediately after your graduation. You can apply whenever you feel that you are ready, but then probably when you're 30, it's slightly late. However, having said that, I have a classmate who was 32, but he was actually looking into training contracts, and he got through, but then he decided not to take it up. which essentially means that there is no age bracket.
Yeah, just on that point, I'm actually one of the youngest people in my cohort at Baker McKenzie. And I'm currently 22. So there's a mix of people who are from that age right through to, I think one of the oldest is about 27. So just as Pranjal said, there's no age requisite at all when it comes to applying, and you can even be working in a different industry entirely when it comes to applying. You just have to demonstrate that motivation and that reasoning in your application.
Right. Great. So in that case, I'm sure that people who have worked for a while will have many things to show for themselves, interesting things. Okay. So there are a lot of questions, but before I go into that, if you could just tell the steps that you have to go through before you are selected, between application and selection, what are the steps involved?
So if you're applying as a law student, you apply for the vacation scheme. You get through to the interviews, you pass the interviews, you go for the vacation scheme, you do the vacation scheme, get interviewed for a training contract, get the training contract. If you are not a law student, if you're applying laterally.
What if you're a law student and you don't have a vacation scheme? Then what?
If you're a law student and you don't have a vacation scheme, then you can technically apply to a training contract directly, but that makes things difficult, especially if you're an Indian student. The preferred route is through a vacation scheme, but like Pranjal and Harry emphasized, you do not have to go through the vacation scheme route. But it is easier to not have a vacation scheme and have some experience instead when you're applying directly to a training contract.
Okay, so in that case, if you apply for a training contract, what happens? Tell us both, like how do you get selected for a vacation scheme and how do you get selected for a training contract?
Okay. So typically in a vacation scheme application, you will be asked those two things that I said, your application as well as those practical questions. Once you get through, you go to the interview stage. In the interview stage, you will have 2 to 3 different kinds of things. So the first is what is called a Watson-Glaser test or something similar, which tests your critical as well as objective reasoning. You have to get a certain number of threshold marks to be able to have your application considered beyond it. So you have to get the minimum number of marks. Thereafter, you will have typically 2 kinds of interviews. One is the HR interview, and the other is the competence or the subject matter based interview, in which, as Harry mentioned, you don't have to know the specific sections or the specific statutes. You just have to have a general sort of commercial awareness. So you have to know what competition law is, that it is based on jurisdictions, etc. And you have to understand how the world is working, how companies are working, how your typical clients are working at this point of time in the current environment. And in the HR interview, you will be asked questions like, why do you want to shift to London? Why do you have to work in an international law firm? What are your experiences? What do you know about diversity, etc.? And this is typically the format for both the vacation scheme as well as the training contract. However, in a training contract, you will be expected to know a little more than somebody applying for a vacation scheme. Because when you're applying for a vacation scheme, it is assumed that you're a law student. You have your basics clear, but you do not really have a lot of practical experience to answer difficult questions related to the law. For a training contract interview, you might be asked those questions, which is why when I did my vacation scheme, I had about 4 weeks of practical experience of working in an international law firm. And it was easier for me to answer such questions in my training contract interview.
Can you give some examples of the questions you had to handle?
Okay, absolutely. So one of the exercises that was thrown at me was this hypothetical M&A case. So I was told that there's company A, company B, they're both merging together. And I was simply asked, write a document to your partner where you have to, in one page, summarize what future steps must the company take, your client, which is merging, what future steps must it take? And in that one page, I had to write an email to the partner. So I had to demonstrate my email writing skills. I did not know that the spell check was turned off. So I had to demonstrate my typing and my spelling ability. And I had to then type out what are the first steps. So for instance, you would check for what the intellectual properties of the target company are. You would do a basic due diligence about any liabilities and debts of the other company, and so on and so forth. So you had to write about 5-6 points. So, and my technical interview was based on the answer that I wrote. So, it's sort of an all-rounded test of what you know about a commercial transaction.
Okay. So, anybody wants to add anything to this? Maybe is it any different in Baker and McKenzie, Harry?
Sure. So yeah, the process can differ between firms, but I think what's already been covered is generally the accepted kind of route that you nearly always start with a written application form. That application form will almost always contain the questions: why do you want to be a lawyer, or why do you want to be a commercial lawyer? Why are you applying to this firm? And there'll generally always be a commercial awareness question along the lines of tell us about a recent news story and how it impacts the firm and our clients. Those are kind of the three almost always questions you're going to get, but there are some variances between what firms look for and they can change it accordingly. Then generally, as Mridul said, you generally have some kind of test after that written stage that you would do at home on a computer, normally a Watson Glaser. Again, it's testing your critical thinking. After that, some firms will do a video interview. So you'll sit in front of your laptop and you'll have to record your answers to certain questions. It's not live, but you kind of do it in your own time at home. And then again, after that video interview stage, it can vary, but you generally have something called an assessment center. So an assessment center will contain anywhere from 3 to 5 different exercises, usually 1 or 2 interviews. They last about 5 to 6 hours over the course of one day. And in that assessment center, you might be expected to do anything from a group exercise where you're working with other candidates to test your teamwork skills. You're doing some kind of written application or written exercise where they're expecting your ability to write well and to proofread. It could be some kind of case study where you're asked to comment on the business transaction. It could be a presentation where you're asked to kind of give your thoughts on the topic. The purpose behind that is to, as was kind of said previously, test your all-round skills and to make sure that your ability to communicate, the ability to understand information, and the ability to disseminate it and share it with others is all the standard they're expecting. Having said that, there are different kind of processes for each firm, but that's generally the kind of expected format. For vacation schemes, there tends to be slightly less of those kind of testing things to go through. There's not sometimes as many things you have to do, but however, some firms it is an identical process. So that's kind of a brief overview of what the process actually looks like.
Got it. There are a few questions that we have got. Let's start taking some of them. One question, and this is a I would say like a common question in different, a little with the slight changes that we're getting again and again. How does a lawyer from small city win a training contract from a law firm? I have good experience as trainer on legal issues in human rights. I can manage to give trainings on other laws as well. Can I apply for, basically, how do I get a training contract? Geeta suggests it. So, yeah. Harry, you want to take this first? Yeah.
What was the question? Sorry, how do you get a training contract?
Yeah, she's saying that, can I get a training contract given that I am a lawyer in a small city? I am training people for human rights, and she's an Indian lawyer, and she's asking if she can get a training contract. Is it possible?
Sure. So I think the general rule for most firms is that training contracts are kind of open to anyone. So as we hinted at earlier, you don't even necessarily need to be a law student or someone who's practiced law to apply. I think the kind of threshold test that recruiters have when they receive an application is what is this person's motivations for applying to this specific firm, not just for training contracts generally, and what are the kind of skill sets that they can demonstrate in their application and kind of justify their motivations for applying. And they don't necessarily have to be legal experiences. Obviously, they might help, but it's not actually a prerequisite. So, for example, when I was answering that question of why do you want to be a commercial lawyer, one of the things I actually talked about was my time working in family law, which is a completely different area of law. And when I was talking about it, I simply evaluated, I liked the idea of, meeting with clients and speaking to people and doing research and kind of problem solving. But when it came to the actual content of what I was doing and the kind of areas of law I was studying, I wanted something that was a bit more tied to the business world because I had a natural interest there. And I wanted something that kind of had a bit more of a context beyond just my local area. So the ability to work on deals which are happening across multiple different jurisdictions and multiple different countries was something which really interested me. And then I kind of went on to evidence to that. So that's an example where you don't necessarily have to have commercial legal experience, but you can still demonstrate your motivations for wanting to work in a commercial law firm based on what you've done today and your kind of academics and your experiences.
So the answer is that it is possible and you can definitely explore. It may be a little a steep climb perhaps, but it's possible. Anybody else, Mridul or Pranjal, you want to add anything? And the same question about NLU. Can non-NLU students get into a training contract? Same question. What do they have to do? If there's a non-NLU student who wants to get into a training contract, what's the way like? Is there any precedent that you know of? I don't know myself, but You think it is possible? Of course, there are people who've done LLM and got it, but
I know of Jindal students. I think Jindal Global Law School has a program with White and Case. I am not quite sure about the specifics of this program, but through that they are able to get vacation schemes and training contracts with White and Case. But for other law schools where they do not have an alumnus who's done one of these training contracts, I would say that I think the diversity in terms of which law schools are getting into this vacation scheme route is increasing by the year. When I was in my second year, National Law University Jodhpur students did not typically get a training contract or a vacation scheme. Ramanuj, you would definitely know this. But it's changed significantly to the extent that last year, of the 5 people who got a Linklaters vacation scheme, 3, and eventually the training contract, 3 were from my university. So it changes literally within a year. You need to have an excellent application. You need to work really hard towards it. And there is absolutely nothing stopping you from getting one of these offers.
right. And surely you need a good CV or a good resume, or like you have to have a good life experience to showcase that you are one of the top candidates, right?
Yes. There is no doing away with that. Even if you are from one of these law schools where people get a vacation scheme, I think there is absolutely no compromise with having an excellent track record, both in terms of academic ability as well as commercial awareness and experience.
Correct. So that should be the focus. Okay, Pranjal, you want to add anything to this?
I think, to be very honest, even though I am from an NLU, it doesn't really feel like an NLU because nobody from my college has ever really gotten a vacation scheme or a training contract. So I think we are all in the same boat as far as vacation schemes or training contract is concerned. But like Mridul said, the situation is changing. And I think at the end of the day, they don't really care as to who we are and where are we from, as long as we are able to justify that burden that we are the top candidate for this position and we will do the job what's required. So I think the most important thing, and I'm going to probably repeat myself for the sake of repeating, research is the key. And so one of the reasons why a lot of students, especially great candidates, even from my college, few of my juniors couldn't really break into this thing is because even though they are doing tremendous research on the firm and even though the application is amazing, the problem is there a lot of people are simply stuck in the mostly wordy cliches and legal jargons. That's what their application is made of. So the advice that I give to them, I'm probably going to just repeat it. I think it's time all of us attempt to exploit the rare. So to give you an example, in my cover letter for Gibson Dunn, I spoke about the fact that I'm really rather amused by allocation of $1,000 to trainees so that they can take out prospective clients for dinner. This essentially means that Gibson Dunn does not mind putting its most junior level players out in the field and kind of trust them with this kind of opportunity. So now these are the things that probably everyone just read and neglected and immediately discarded. But these are the things that will be digged upon by the partners, by the HR. So the key is to find that rarity and that you can use it in your application and tell them that how you expect these kind of qualities, these kind of things from your future employer. And then you make it personal, you link it to what you expect from your future employer. And this is the kind of thing that you expect. And then you are sorted. You're golden.
Yeah, just to add to that quickly, I totally agree with you that you need to kind of differentiate yourself and kind of go that extra mile. I've spent a lot of time speaking to people who currently work in recruitment or who have left recruitment into other professions. And one of the things they constantly say is you need to avoid those cliches and telling the firm things that the firm will know better than anyone. So simply stating in your application that the firm has this many offices in this many countries, all you're kind of doing is repeating information that the firm will know about themselves, and you're not giving any indication as to why that's particularly important to you or kind of how it's inspired you to apply there. So when it comes to spelling out your motivations, really try to make it a real personal story almost that you're selling to the recruiter, and try to avoid simply dousing them with information, especially information that ultimately they will know better than anyone. You need to make it really personal.
Okay, we have received like tons and tons of questions. Some of them are relevant. I think it seems more relevant, so I'm going to quickly pick up a few. There's a question on question on values of the firm question. With Anupam Sambhu is asking, vacation scheme application has question regarding values of the firm. How to tackle this best? What are they expecting from the candidate?
This is one of the easier things to understand, provided you just research well into it. All of these firms have what is called a graduate recruitment team. The graduate recruitment team is responsible for hiring or scouting for future applicants and getting them to apply. And one of the things they do is they do a lot of promotion of what their values are or what they're expecting from their candidates. All you need to do is go to their websites or go to their YouTube channels or their Instagram handles and find out what they've uploaded in the past and go through it. I mean, that's one of the simplest things you can do. For example, for a firm like Linklaters, you can find so many graduate recruitment videos telling you what commercial awareness means, what kind of commercial awareness are they looking for in their candidates, and such simple questions as, is it important to have a legal background, or is it important to know the intricacies of the law before you apply, have been answered well in these videos on YouTube. So just go and research well.
I think especially right now as well, given the whole coronavirus situation, a lot of law firms and graduate recruitment teams are taking that digital as well. So they're starting to put this information out in a way which means you don't have to physically travel to a location to speak to a firm in a way that you haven't in the past. So for example, Baker McKenzie are doing a live stream on my LinkedIn on Wednesday, and they're actually going to get all of the trainees to come in on the video call so that you can get that experience that you would have normally got at, say, a law fair or a careers fair. You can simply get online. So I think now's a really great time to go on sites like LinkedIn, sites like Twitter and YouTube, and kind of see all the digital content that law firms are putting out, because especially given the current situation, they're putting out a lot of it.
Excellent. Okay. What kind of internships and publishing work one needs to get into to make a CV that would be like great for a training contract? Mridul, you want to take this?
There is no objective answer to this. I think when it comes to internships, they are more about your practical exposure to what happens in a commercial law firm. So it helps if you have those kinds of internships. For example, in my case, I think there were less corporate law internships, but more commercial litigation-based internships. But the end result was the same. I was aware of what kind of questions does a client ask when there is, say, an M&A or a competition law issue or something related to intellectual property. So your publications as well as internships should reflect something that is relevant for the firm. And there is no objective answer to it. You could have, for example, Harry was just speaking about how he had some family law experience, and he used that in his application to demonstrate that, through that he got to learn something that might be useful for his tenure at the firm. Mm-hmm. This is just an example. So you can use your previous experience in many creative ways to show to the firm that you have sufficient knowledge and expertise to be able to be a good applicant.
Sounds great. Okay, there's a question about international exposure. How important is international exposure? Does it help?
So I think if you're applying to an international firm, obviously if you've got international experience, it's fantastic, because one of the things that an international firm will want their international lawyers to be is kind of globally aware. If they're bilingual, fantastic, because they'll need to work with clients from all over the world, but it's not a necessity. And obviously that's a really clear and obvious example about how you can demonstrate why you want to operate in an international context. However, it's not a prerequisite. I think a lot of kind of students in the UK, at least, obviously don't have experience outside of the UK. And again, it goes back to the point of saying, how is what I'm writing down on my application relevant to what the firm is looking for, and how does it demonstrate my motivations and why I'm applying to that specific firm? So international experience is obviously fantastic. I think you just have to describe it in the right way, and that's more of a general point when it comes to cover letters and CVs generally. So you could technically be the best candidate ever in terms of your academics and your experiences, but if you don't portray it and sell it to the right way to the recruiter, you might not get that far in the process. One of the easiest ways to do that is to make sure that when you're writing that application or you're making that point, one, you've got evidence to back it up, and you can demonstrate whatever it is that you're stating. And two, that claim or that point you're trying to make only applies to that specific firm. So for example, you shouldn't be able to go through your application, change the name of the law firm on the paper and send it to a different one, and it still makes sense. You need to have that level of specificity and kind of detail in your answer.
Perfect. There's a question that has come many times. It's about what is a good time to apply for vacation scheme and, of course, training contract consequently. So, what is a good time to apply for vacation scheme? 4th year, 5th year, or people who are in 3-year law studies, 3-year, 2nd year, or if somebody is not a lawyer, when do they apply?
So for somebody who's in a 5-year law program, the penultimate year, the 4th year is the best time to apply. For somebody who's in a 3-year law program, the final year is the best time to apply. But you can apply otherwise also. But this is what they recommend on their websites.
Right, and those people who are not studying law.
Those people are not studying law. I'm not aware of any Indian route for them to apply. I think as Indian students, you have to have a legal background or you have to be studying in a law school. But in case there are exceptions that Harry or Pranjal know of about Indian students, and because I'm not aware.
Okay.
I don't know specifically about international applicants. I think, like we said earlier, the training contracts are generally open to everyone, and a lot of the times, if you're unsure as to whether you are able to be considered, because some law firms will limit, say for example, they only want penultimate year students applying, and in this particular window, they might then open it up to different types of students and different types of applicants. In another window of the same year, if you just make sure when you open up the application and when you go on the firm's website, they'll detail who is available to apply, and just making sure that you fit that criteria to some degree would probably save yourself quite a bit of time.
Yep, and I think a lot of people don't get it because they don't apply. So
That's true.
Sure, there's the only way to find out, right? So there is a question that there are a few people have asked this question: does virtual internships, they're like this, this digital Sherpa and etc., where you have these virtual internships in law firms? Are these any helpful for anything for that matter?
So I think obviously if you don't have practical work experience, they can be a great substitute. So they're a fantastic way to just learn a bit more about what trainee solicitors do on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, it's not quite as good as actually practicing in person, getting real practical experience, but they're a great way to learn a bit more about what trainees do, and hopefully kind of get you a bit more familiar with what contracts look like, how you might be expected to do a certain report, improving some of your drafting skills, your ability to proofread. So they certainly have that value to them as well. There's also the idea that a lot of different firms will tailor these virtual internships based on their values or what they might look for. So they can also be a great way to just learn a bit more about what a firm finds important and what they kind of really value as well. So I think that there's no real harm to them really. I think they're a great way to hopefully build some skills and learn more about what trainees are and what firms do.
Okay, we are out of time officially, but if you guys have a little more time, we can continue to ask. There's a lot of questions that remain unanswered. I can try asking a few more questions. If you have
I'm still free.
Yeah, sure.
Sure, great. Okay. So one question that I'm getting, this is a question: what are pupillages and ins? This is related to barristers, of course. Zainab is asking. Anybody?
So essentially, inns and chambers are, I guess, the equivalent of law firms. They're the places where barristers come together and do their work, and pupillages are the kind of route to getting a position in that barrister or that chamber. So it's a bit like a vacation scheme or training contract. And that's kind of the short answer, and I think the best way to describe it with an analogy.
Great. I think that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There's a very specific question by Ira. She's asking, with regards to the solicitor qualification and the upcoming SQV. So I understand QLT is being replaced by SQV. What would your advice be to students graduating in 2021? Do we start the process of vacation scheme transfer or training contract now, or should we wait for SQV to happen and then apply?
I think right now we don't really know when the SQE is going to be finalized and kind of finished and put into practice. So I think if you've got the time, you've got the ability right now, sending off some applications and kind of getting used to the process and how it works, and kind of getting an example, and writing applications is a good way to kind of practice. I think regardless of what happens, if you get offered a training contract whilst the SQE is being put in place, law firms are very good at kind of managing what you'll be doing, what you'll be expected to do. So for example, they might ask you to finish and do the LPC instead of the SQE. If you're in that transition period, they'll obviously support you and take you through that process. So I think if you've got the time, you've got the ability, I think just writing applications now is a great way to practice. And then whatever happens at the end of it, the law firms are very good at kind of managing you through any changes that might happen. Because ultimately, if they've accepted you and they want you to start a training contract, they'll help you do that, and they'll help you kind of start as soon as possible within visa.
Right. No reason to hold it off. Next question, whoever knows this answer to this, Tanvi Gala is asking, after doing law degree in India, do you have to do GDL course or directly do LPC?
No requirement for a GDL course for Indian lawyers, for qualified Indian lawyers. There is absolutely no requirement for a GDL.
Okay. There's next question from Shauri Gaikwad. She's asking, how soon do you apply for a vacation scheme? 6 months before or a year before? I mean, she's trying to understand what's the right time to apply, I think. Although you've tried answering this, but still. What is the lead time?
As I said, for a vacation scheme, specifically for a vacation scheme, the firms have mentioned the typical time, the ideal time on their websites. And I think it is 4th year for a 5-year law course and 3rd year for a 3-year law course.
Okay. Somebody is asking, how many times can one apply? If my applications get rejected once, can I apply again? Simran is asking.
It does depend on the firm. So some firms do have a limit. So they'll say in a 2-year period, you can apply a maximum of 3 times, for example, for a vacation scheme or training contract collectively in that period. However, other firms don't do that, and they just allow you to apply as many times as you want. I think the biggest sticking point, if that's the case, is make sure you don't submit the same application, because if it didn't work the first time, it won't work the second time. So a good thing to do is to go through all of the old applications and get someone else to review them, and try to get someone to proofread them so they can see where you might have made spelling mistakes or where you might not have written quite so clearly. And then that next time when it comes to drafting the second attempt, you've got something that's different, and you can try something from a new angle, and hopefully use what you've learned in the past.
Got it. There's a question about Tracy Panos is asking, can you please ask what are the things that set their CV apart from other candidates, and what we could do, what we could be doing now to further our chances? That's a difficult question, sure. But
was it CV or cover letter they said?
Basically, yeah, it's about like, what can I make, like, it's just the CV is like, resume CV is like, what can I do so that I set myself apart and increase my chances of getting this vacation? Apart from, of course, studying about the law firm and doing a good application. Of course, they're looking for top applicants. So how can I figure into the top 1%, 2% of the applicants?
So I think now's a really good time to kind of demonstrate your ability to be proactive and to try new things. So you can go online. There are loads of different courses that you can do online. Some of them are even free, as an opportunity to kind of develop your skills. But I think if you're really looking for a way to kind of make yourself a better candidate right now and to kind of improve your chances, it comes down to those things we talked about earlier. So trying to improve your commercial awareness, the kind of skills that the firm's looking for, trying to practice your ability to write well and to write clearly, listen to podcasts, read the news, try to stay up to date with all the latest developments in the industry and outside of it, and really try to kind of ensure that your knowledge and your understanding of the business world generally is up to date. That's a really great way to stay proactive at the moment. And then when it comes to your application and you're asked those questions about, how is a news story going to impact a firm, for example, you can use all of the reading, all of the writing, all of the kind of listening that you've been doing over the last few months to help better your answer and to kind of stay up to date and informed about everything that's going on.
I can share a couple of examples that I've seen. You guys can tell me if this is correct. So one NLU Delhi student that I knew closely, she got through to, she got a training contract, currently working in UK. She was writing a weekly column for Huffington Post, which is not very difficult to get by the way, but she was writing great articles around legal issues and social legal issues. And she thinks that it really helped her to get picked. I know somebody else who wrote a book on somebody's a senior from college wrote a book on biotechnology law, and it was the first book on biotechnology law in India at that time. And I think that helped him a great deal to be selected. I'm not sure. I'm not saying these are the only things you do or there's a formula like this, But I feel that if you do things which set you apart in terms of shows tremendous interest in law or tremendous ability to work or ability to do high quality work, I think it makes a difference. So what do you think, Pranjal?
Yeah, I think these standout points always help. I know of a person who was helping the government of India with the drafting of the insolvency and bankruptcy code as a research assistant for almost 2.5 years
Yeah.
while at law school. So these things obviously count, and these standout things will always help you get a vacation scheme, a training contract, an LLM application through.
So the idea is to be remarkable, essentially.
Absolutely, but always focusing on the basics the most, and the basics are those that we've pointed out. They are non-negotiable. They cannot be dispensed with. And on top of that, if you can have these additional experiences, then that's fantastic.
Great, excellent. There's a question from Muskan. Can you apply for a training contract after getting some work experience in a firm in India? You may not work for a training contract, right? If you're already working in a law firm, how does that work?
No. You have to still go through the training contract process.
You still have to go through that.
Yeah, unless you are like a partner or a very senior associate, in which case they might make an exception. But I think it is a legal requirement for you to have finished the training contract before you can become a solicitor in the UK. I think, I'm not quite sure. We'll have to read more.
You can do, I don't know a lot about it either, but you can do something called means equivalent qualification, which essentially means that, like we said, the purpose of the training contract is to give you practical experience and to train you on the job. And the SRA will allow you to take, I think it might be something like 4 to 5 years. Again, I'm really not sure, but something like a certain number of years practical legal work experience that fits the certain requirements and criteria, and essentially count that as your training process and allow you to qualify. It's the criteria is quite tough, and I think it does change a lot. So it's worth researching to see if you qualify. But if you're already practicing, it's something to consider as to whether you can kind of count that as time spent towards your development and your qualification.
Right. There are a bunch of questions about how COVID-19 is going to affect vacation scheme applications. Of course, they'll affect, right? So what's happening?
Yeah, big question. I think it'd be great actually just to talk about coronavirus generally on the law profession, because I think it's a really interesting topic. So just to quickly answer the question, when it comes to vacation schemes and training contracts, a lot of firms are, obviously because no one can leave their home and there's these kind of restrictions on travel, a lot of firms are switching to virtual vacation schemes where essentially you would join something like a group call like this and try to do the same as what you normally do in person as much as possible and recruit that way. But when it comes to the broader point of whether there will still be spaces, whether there will still be training contract offers, and kind of how the whole legal market will react, I think one thing it's important to keep in mind is that when you are a trainee solicitor, your fees, your hourly fees, are a lot lower compared to people who are more senior than you. And so from the firm's perspective, it's a great way for them to keep doing business with clients whilst keeping their costs down, which is obviously what's really important in a recession. People don't have lots of money just to spend on legal fees and stuff. So,
right. And interestingly, this is a situation where there is a lot of renegotiation, contract review work. There is a lot of work that junior lawyers can do.
Absolutely. And if anything, it's people who are, have been practicing for 7 to 9 years, for example, but aren't looking to become partner, or they're not quite good enough to become partner. Those are the really expensive people to keep on your payroll, because they can be paid a significant amount of money. And if it's better to spend that money on having several trainees do the work, like you said, then it's arguable that that's kind of the way to go. So in terms of coronavirus generally, there are certain areas of the legal profession which will almost definitely see a kind of decrease in the amount of work that's available. So, mergers and acquisitions, for example, is a great example, because with everything that's going on, businesses don't really want to take the huge risk that comes with buying another company, or when they don't even know what the economy is going to look like in 6 months, or they don't know how it's going to work when lockdowns are lifted. But then on the other side of things, things like employment law will almost certainly see an increase in activity with everything that's happening, at least in the UK, when it comes to people being furloughed, people being let go from their jobs. They need lawyers in those rooms to handle those situations. So that's kind of an example about how the legal industry generally, it may or may not see a kind of increase or decrease on the whole, but definitely certain practice areas and compared to others will shift and others will fall. So that's kind of how the kind of demand will be met, I think, during the whole COVID-19 situation.
Okay, there's a question for Pranjal. How difficult is it to get visa sponsorships to work after completing an LLM? How long are we allowed to stay post completion of our degree? Are there some things known as work permits? I think even that is in flux. I believe after Brexit, that rule.
Yeah, I think I just answered that question, and I essentially told them that how it's going to be very uncertain in this whole post-Brexit coupled with the corona-infected UK economy. However, the visa rules have been relaxed, and you can now particularly stay for a year after your graduation. And however, you need to find a sponsor, rather an employer who is willing to sponsor your visa. And I'm going to be very honest, it's rather difficult if it's not a law firm, because not everybody will be able to do that. And it costs a lot of money. And he has already, I think Mridul has at length spoken about how all of this is pretty expensive for a law firm. So it's honestly, I mean, to answer that question in brief, it's very uncertain and nobody knows.
Nobody knows, but you should try your luck with startups. By the way, some of my students and friends had great luck getting jobs with startups and getting their visa sponsored. Especially if you're a lawyer and you join a legal startup and you're willing to do sales and marketing, you might make it.
Correct.
So this is something, just a quick thing that I've learned recently.
Correct.
What would be an ideal application for an Indian applicant be for somebody who wishes to go for a vacation scheme? Rahul Kaushik, there is no ideal application. There has to be your own, it has to be something unique. There's no formula that you can take and copy paste, right? So that's what all the experts have been telling us. That will be like the last thing you do. There's no formula. If you follow a formula, it will not work. Even if it works and everybody follows it, it will not work anymore.
Yeah, I can speak from experience that writing out a template and copying and pasting it and just changing the name, sending it to firms doesn't work. That's the exact same approach I took in my first round of applications, and all 40 applications I sent off got rejected because firms can see it a mile off. You need to be specific and you need to tailor it.
Yeah. So don't do any ideal application. Like, you have to be authentic. You have to share your story, and you have to something that is something that is on the spot. Come up with something, right? Creativity is important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's a question on how to manage a master's and traineeship simultaneously. You don't do that, right? You do it after another.
I suppose, I mean, that's what I did, but to be honest, I'm not a very sincere student to begin with. So I was only focusing upon getting a job and didn't really care about my master's. However, to be very honest, it could be enormously taxing, especially when you are in an intense course and studying in a very research-heavy university like Oxbridge. But then having said that, it's not an impossible task to achieve, and it's fairly manageable, and people have done it.
That's very confusing. On one hand, you say it's very difficult, then you say it's manageable.
I mean, because I can't really sell you something that's not possible or that's easy, and then I have to tell you how it's a difficult thing, but yet not impossible.
We get it. It's difficult. It's difficult and not impossible. Got it. Okay, there are people asking if number of people being hired from India will go down due to COVID. We don't know. Nobody knows. Okay.
Yeah, nobody knows. Some smaller firms have cancelled their vacation schemes, but I think when it comes to the bigger law firms, they're going to carry on. If it's not possible to have them in the firm, then as Harry mentioned, through a virtual vacation scheme program.
Okay, so there are a lot of questions. I think many questions Pranjal and others have already answered.
Hello.
Oh, is he cut out?
Yeah. I think to reconnect.
Hello.
I can still hear you guys.
Yeah, I think there's some issue with.
I'm not sure if it worked.
Okay, can you hear me now?
There we go.
Okay, I was asking. There was a question about how people want to work on an international basis, in a different country. In those cases, would there be like immigration change? A lot of countries are putting in protectionist immigration policies. So does it affect people who want to work in international law firms?
I think these immigration policies are temporary in nature at this point of time. From what I can see, they are only geared towards how to deal with the pandemic. And once the pandemic subsides, I think it'll be back to the same position, at least from an immigration point of view. So one can't really say what's going to happen. It's really uncertain.
There are way too many questions, and we are 20 minutes, beyond time. So we're gonna wrap things up now. Sorry, guys. You are free to post questions on LinkedIn on my profile and tag Harry, or you can post it directly on their profiles as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I'd just like to add one last point. I think Ella asked this question about how to approach some lawyer who you do not know with a question on LinkedIn, etc. And I think there is a very simple answer to that, which I have personally applied and have got answers against, which is just don't ask questions which are answers to which are easily available off the internet. If you're asking a question from a stranger, just be polite enough to introduce yourself and ask something that is not available on the internet that you could not have found after some research. Don't ask them how to go about doing a training contract. Ask them, what is this firm looking for in an application specifically?
Well, ask questions that people would be happy to answer, right? So
correct.
You can ask them their experiences, right? That would be a better way to do it.
Absolutely, right.
Okay, great. So I think this was a great session, and there we could go on and on and on, but Muskan is raising her hand. Let's just give it short. One token voice.
Hello.
Question. Yes, Muskan, please.
Hello. Hi. Good evening to the panel. Can you hear me?
You're very audible. Go ahead.
Yeah. So my question is, before this webinar, training contract was an alien term to me. So I'll be asking a very basic question as to what I'm a third year law student from Faculty of Law, Delhi University. And for someone like me who doesn't have a very attractive CV, as far to say that I have very limited internships and very limited publications, what could be done by someone like me who's already in the third year to acquire a training contract in order to make my CV more attractive or to make me a favorable candidate for the firm?
I would like to say that I think it would be useful for you to get some on-the-job experience. Do consider applying to an Indian law firm. Do consider gaining some experience in that firm and then applying for a training contract. I can give you an example of a Faculty of Law partner from my firm. He went to Faculty of Law, got some experience at Luthra, L&L partners in India, and then applied to a firm in Singapore, and then from Singapore shifted to Linklaters and is now a partner. And I think that's a fantastic journey that can act as an example for you.
Yeah. You can do international work from India. You can do international commercial arbitration. You can work on cross-border deals and then move to jurisdictions like Singapore, Dubai, etc., and then slowly move into all of that. Great. So I think we have covered a lot of ground today. Actually, there would be a lot of questions, I'm sure, and we couldn't answer everything. But thank you so much, Harry. Thank you so much. There are so many questions. People are still raising their hands. But why don't we do this? We'll do another session, right? Another session. And I promise you we'll do this session. I'm sure Harry, Pranjal, and Mridul will be available. And in case, we'll bring more people, more speakers. Don't worry. Okay? So let's give it a rest today, guys. And you can connect with them and ask questions directly on LinkedIn, right? So
yeah, I just put my info in the chat in case anyone wants to ask questions.
Yes.
Happy to answer questions, and I produce all kinds of resources and guides talking about.
Yeah, you can share the link of your podcast here. You can subscribe.
Yeah.
So you can share. You can subscribe to More Than Law, which is Harry's podcast, right? So
yeah, More From Law.
Yeah, more from law. Sorry, right. More than law. So we would love to do another. In fact, how should lawyers go about producing their own podcast? We do another webinar.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. That'd be great.
So okay. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you for making time. and let's see what we can do next, and something more exciting about those wanting to working in international law firms. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Any parting message, Harry, Mridul, Pranjal?
Good luck.
Yes, actually, good luck to everybody, and feel free to reach out.
Yeah, likewise, feel free to get in contact with me.
Excellent. Pranjal, anything?
Yeah, just want everyone to know that if you think you can shave when you are drunk, please know that you can't. Stay safe.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, guys. Bye.
Thank you.